IELTSpeaking.ca. IELTS Speaking Part 2 and 3 questions and Band 9 model answers to the topic of plane travel. Here is the Part 2 topic related to plane travel. And here are the Part 3 questions related to this topic. Now we're going to hear a Band 9 response first to Part 2. Remember, you have 1 minute to prepare on a real test and 2 minutes to speak about it. This topic brings me back to an experience that I had a few years ago. Funny enough, I was on a flight with a friend named Bill who was sitting next to an off-duty airline pilot who was commuting home after a long stretch of work. Bill started up some small talk with him and found out what his profession was. Well, once he discovered who he was, Bill got into a really engaging conversation with him. This is because my pal was considering taking some flight training at that time. I didn't really get involved in the conversation that much, but I tuned in and heard that the pilot, I'm sorry I don't recall his name, had a lot of interesting information to share about his job and the airline industry. He said a lot of things that he loved and disliked about what he did. One thing that I remember was when he shared his perspective about his long workdays, which involved regional flying around the country. He said that he'd sometimes do up to 4 different legs a day to various cities across the country. Being in the air was the part that he was passionate about and never grew tired of. However, he didn't enjoy his time on the ground in between flights. I was pretty surprised to hear about his unhealthy lifestyle, but after listening further, it seemed to make sense. They were rushing around a lot and didn't have much time to get a proper meal. He grew very tired of airline food to the point where he couldn't eat it anymore. Delays happened frequently, which often made him work more than 12 hours a day, and they'd often be away from home for around 4 consecutive days, staying in hotels with long commutes back and forth. Those seemed to be the roughest parts that he didn't like about his job. I guess that he didn't have to worry about some of the typical passenger complaints, as I think pilots must have a fair amount of room in the cockpit so they can stretch their legs and not worry about bumping elbows with someone. My friend Bill really gained a lot of useful insights about what it's like to be a pilot, and he decided it wasn't something that he was cut out to do. Here is some Part 2 vocabulary that was used in this topic. Now we're going to turn to Part 3 and listen to a Band 9 response to the following 6 questions. It's definitely been growing in popularity over the past 10 years or so. From what I see, flight tickets have become much more affordable to the average person in my country. Also, with globalization, there is increased business travel, both internationally and domestically. It looks like companies prefer faster travel methods to prevent lost time, so they'll choose it over car or train travel. However, there are a small amount of people who have turned their backs on flight travel. Some are concerned about its impact on the environment. Despite this, air travel is still on the rise. Well, I think the number one advantage is that it is the fastest mode of transport. No other form of public transport can compare to the speed of planes. Also, there are no physical barriers such as mountains and seas that can obstruct flying. Of course, the obvious minus of using this way of travel is the high cost. A flight can be more than a month's salary to a lot of people. So it will take a large bite out of most people's pockets. I suppose that this depends on a number of factors. A person who is super rich probably won't care about cost at all, but for the average Joe, price becomes more significant. I'm sure that most people don't mind putting up with a little amount of discomfort, especially if it's a short flight of only 1 or 2 hours. However, for longer ones, comfort suddenly becomes more of a priority. Unfortunately, though, most people have to put up with it unless they want to fork over double the cost of an already expensive ticket to sit in business class. It probably is a decent job for people to do, but I can see why many wouldn't want to. With a lot of international travelers around everywhere, airports can be pretty interesting places. Also, since flying is a growing business, there must be a lot of work stability. However, many of the jobs there, such as a check-in clerk or a baggage handler, seem to be boring as they are fairly repetitive. And due to frequent flight delays, they must have to be able to put up with unpredictable work schedules and a lot of irate customers. Hmm, I don't have a lot of knowledge or facts about this, but if I were to guess, I believe that flying by air requires a lot more energy than travel on the ground. So I'm assuming that it is a more polluting form of transport that releases greater amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Also, as far as I know, we are far away from having something like an electric plane that can transport large groups of people. This isn't the case for cars such as the Tesla Model S or the Nissan Leaf. To be honest with you, I'm not sure about it. I think most people would love to have both more international travel as well as cleaner air, and I believe that it may be possible to achieve. Governments should be involved in establishing shared agreements to limit the amount of carbon emissions to create acceptable levels. This in turn may force airlines and companies like Boeing to come up with new advances that limit toxic fuel usage. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.